So, welcome everyone. Nick Wagner Sr. It's Sunday night at 8 o'clock Eastern. So, I'm back with another fantastic guest. And we're going to introduce Kyle Wiley in 1 second, but a quick programming note. So, I am not having a live show the next two Sundays. So, just an FYI, taking a couple weeks off for the summertime. So Kyle, you're my last show before a couple weeks off, but we'll be back at the end of August with some more guests. And I already have people lined up for September and October. So, really excited for that. But Kyle, I am just so excited. I know. I've been following you on LinkedIn for some time now, so I'm really excited to have you join me on the podcast. And I had mentioned to you when we were prepping for this that I do this so people can hear about other individuals' career stories, so they can figure out what they could possibly do. I have a lot of early career professionals listening to the show, and look, I remember when I was early on in my career and I just graduated from school, you just don't know what you don't know, and there's no syllabus on what you're supposed to do next. So I'm hoping that people can listen to this podcast and hear from amazing people like you and maybe be inspired. So Kyle Wiley, welcome to the Full Potential Podcast. If you want to share a little bit about who you are, we'll start there and then we'll jump into hearing all about your career journey.
Awesome. Well, first of all, Nick, thank you for having me, and it's an honor to be your last guest until the end of next month. So a little bit about me. I am an HR professional that is passionate about the power of connection. I have experience throughout different industries in both the government as well as the private sector.
Yeah, and we in HR could probably talk and share stories for quite some time because it's an interesting field, and we're going to talk about that because I'm just going to go out on a limb here and guess that when you were a little Kyle, you didn't want to be an HR professional when you grew up. But we'll talk about that.
Yep.
But I think, but to your point, I know, you've been doing HR for quite some time now. I love it because I get to help people. That's why I like being in HR. And I'm sure we'll hear a little bit about that from you as well. So let's actually start. Let's start the journey, Kyle. And I want to go back, right? Because I always like to start with guests and hear. I love to hear what people wanted to do when they were a little kid when they grew up, right? Because I'm just fascinated. Like I wanted to be an architect because I loved Legos. That was like my dream. Did not come true, but I love Legos. Still love them today. When you were growing up as a kid, right? Was it elementary school, or middle school, high school? What did you want to do when you grew up? Did you want to be in HR, or was it something different?
No, so as you alluded to, Nick, I did not, as a young Kyle, want to be in human resources. I did not know what HR was at the time. I had a couple of different, career aspirations. At one point, I wanted to be an actor, a doctor, a lawyer. But for the most part, I was a very curious kid. I was at a really keen interest in science, and I remember just having a microscope, a telescope. I'm the middle of five siblings. So
wow.
My youngest sibling is 12 years younger than me. So when I was in seventh grade, when my mom was pregnant with my baby sister, she provided me with a medical journal because I had so many questions. This was obviously pre-Google, before internet was at the tip at your fingertips. So she gave me a medical journal that almost like the encyclopedia that I would just pour through, and that really sparked my interest in just learning and growing and whatnot.
Wow, so one of five siblings. That's a lot of kids in one house. You're that must have been interesting, especially with that age gap, right? Because I mean, I grew up with only one brother who was 3 years younger than me, so we were pretty close together. How much older was your older siblings compared to you?
Yeah, so it was almost a 10-year 10-year gap. So that I had my two older brothers, and I think as everyone knows, the middle child is always the best. And part of the reason why, right, Nick, is because we have the best of both, and we're the ones who are the most even keeled and balanced. And I do feel like that. Even in the household, I developed a skill set that has served me well in my career of being someone who's been able to just almost be a cultural chameleon and just be able to assess and integrate myself really easily and make connections quickly.
I'm going to guess as the middle of five, you probably had to do a lot of negotiation and solve a lot of problems, which I'm sure comes in handy in your career in HR. So it's interesting how our life growing up affects how we end up working in our role, in our roles in our jobs. And I'll say this, you could still be an actor, right? I think you said you mentioned that's definitely still in the cards, right? I mean,
That's
like,
right. Oh,
you're on a podcast now. It's not quite
listen,
acting, but look,
listen, Nick. Morgan Freeman started in his later years in life, so I'm not giving up my hopes.
There you go. So you didn't end up becoming a scientist, even though you had a huge interest in science. Let's talk about this. Was the expectation in the Wiley household that you went to school after you went to either community college or 4-year college or technical college, or was that something that you decided? Tell us about that. How that decision happened.
Yeah, we're a relatively close knit family. I can't recall if they gave me the direct expectation like, "Kyle, you have to go to college," but they always had high expectations. I was always pushed to do more and be more of myself, and they taught me to strive for that. We grew up in a working class neighborhood in northern New Jersey, Jersey City. And, where we lacked on income, we had in values and love. I grew up in the church, and really those values also in terms of service and that altruism was really embedded in me at an early age. But, certainly when I in high school, I went to public school pretty much the majority from 1st to 8th grade. And then I ended up going to an all boys prep school called St. Peter's Prep. It's a Jesuit school in Jersey City, and the chances of me going there from the neighborhood that I grew up in was very low. So, I was able to test in and get accepted. And I think that, just being in that environment, plus, having a family that pushed me to strive for my best, even though that there were struggles through those 4 years, definitely set me up to, see college as the end game.
Yeah, no. And I asked that question because I've had an amazing amount of guests who've gone to college and had great careers, and I've also had an amazing amount of guests that never went to college and had great careers.
That's right.
Right. So it's really a mix, and I just like to share that because I think the days of, this is my opinion, the days where you have like counselors in high school telling kids that you have to go to college, you have to go to college, you have to go to college. I'm seeing less and less of that, and saying like, you don't have to go to a 4-year college. You have to do, we want you to do additional education, but it's got to be right for what you want to do, right? It could be technical college. It could be a community college. It could be going to get a certification in name the field, right? So no, I appreciate you sharing that. So how did you're from Jersey, but you ended up going to Southern Connecticut State University. So how did you end up at Southern, and you went for Bachelor of Science in Finance, which is not related to anything medical. So how did this happen?
Yeah, so one of the main reasons, one of the main activities that I did in high school was football. That was something that as a kid I was very passionate about, and I was, long story short, I was recruited. I did have a few different colleges that I was considering, and ultimately chose Southern for a few different reasons, and I ended up not playing the full 4 years, but Connecticut ended up becoming my home, and honestly, part of the reason why I chose finance was tied to my ambition to be successful and to again make more of myself. I kind of looked across, I knew I wanted to work, do something in the business field, and I almost, I look back on this now and kind of laugh, but I chose finance because it seemed like the best way to make the most money. And I ended up pursuing that field throughout the 4 years of my time there.
Well, I will say this, being comfortable with finance, no matter if you're in HR like us, or if you're in marketing, or if you're in technology, it really helps no matter what field you're in. Because, I mean, this, right? A lot of people do not like finances and do not like math. So if you can be comfortable with it, I do think it gives you a competitive advantage. So I like the way you thought there. And I want to ask this because I think this is probably underappreciated. Being a student athlete is extremely demanding. Because the expectations of you as an athlete, and then what you have to also do with school on top of that. I mean, any quick thoughts on what that was like?
Yeah, one of the things that our coach at the time, embedded in us, within that first year is that, at the end of your 4 years, if all you can say that is that you were a football player, then you weren't successful. You want to use this as an opportunity to expand your skill sets and get the education so that you have a life beyond football. So I think if you are aspiring to be a student athlete, you definitely want to think about the bigger picture and ask questions about, okay, well, besides the sport, what else is the school giving me? How are they going to, most people have the aspiration to be paid professionally, but you should also be practical and think about that plan B and, think about life after that sport and, which environment is going to set you up to be the most successful, whether it is professional or, after.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice, and I love how your coach was upfront and honest with everyone about that, really from the beginning. I mean, I think that's way to set the tone. So you went to school for finance. I know you eventually got your master's in human resources management. Did you go work before you got your master's, or did you go right from getting your undergrad to your master's degree?
Yeah, so I mean, even before college, I had my first job was working in Rite Aid. I was used to working, even while being prior to college, I worked. So I want to clarify, I was on a partial scholarship. So I worked while I was in college. I was an RA. I worked part time at the desk in the dorms. I also worked at the library while I was a student athlete. And then towards my senior year, when I was not playing football, I got one of my first bigger jobs working in T-Mobile. So, I definitely, continued to work, throughout that time. And, when I got my degree, the first job that I got was working as a financial advisor for, a small company, because I, wanted to, one of the things that I knew that I was, good at was making connections, building relationships, being social. And I wanted to, segue that into, a career that could, set me up for, long-term success. The only problem though, Nick, is that I graduated in 2008. 2008, as many people know, was one of the largest financial crashes that the world, not just the country, has ever seen. So, I wasn't as successful as I was hoping to be, right? When I'm this 21-year-old kid going door to door, having conversations with families and near retirees, and I had a hard time convincing them that I was the person that was going to help them, stop the bleeding from their funds, right? So, that was, although it was a field that I enjoyed and had some passion around, I knew at the time that, it was, I needed to look for something else to, sustain myself.
Yeah, I mean, that was a difficult time, as you mentioned, for so many people, especially those people that were just graduating from school or just trying to find an internship. I mean, it was a tough job market, as you mentioned. So you ended up making the move to Citibank, and worked there for a good amount of time as a payroll specialist. So in a payroll specialist, as the HR guy, right? Sounds like an HR role with a financial lens. So
right.
was that like your first introduction to HR, but able to leverage your financial acumen at the same time?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I was able to, so as I mentioned, I was, looking for another opportunity, a way that I can, get a W-2 because I was an independent contractor. And I had a friend that worked for Citigroup in a payroll capacity, and they were looking for people. So I ended up, I ended up getting a referral just through my network, and starting there, and my background in finance certainly did help. And we worked in the department that I worked in. We supported the entire Citigroup within North America. So we fielded a lot of inquiries and questions, and had to have that financial background. But we worked in partnership with many HR generalists, and working with them, building that network. And then even having connection with the HR generalist that supported our, group, really helped me to understand, okay, beyond, what I'm looking at, that HR could be a, viable career option that could allow me to, again, leverage the things that I'm good at, that I'm passionate about, helping people, building connections, and have a career that I can be proud of. And I want to also mention that, at a parallel timeline of this happening, I when I was working as a financial advisor, my fiance at the time, who's now my wife, was pregnant with our first child. So that was one of the motivations that I had to, okay, I have to, really, buckle down and make sure that I have, that I take care of my family. And, that at the same, as I'm, building and growing in my career in human resources, I'm also starting my family. So, those things, I think back on that time as, a very pivotal, point in my life.
Yeah, and as someone who has kids myself, I'll never forget, Kyle. Like, people tell you, like, once you find out that that you're having a baby, or like once the baby's here, like your life totally changes, and you're like, yeah, I believe you, I get it, right?
Yeah.
But like you don't really get it until it happens. Then you're like, oh wow, and so I totally hear you. I actually think that payroll is probably, when people think HR, I think people probably think payroll pretty commonly. They probably think of recruiting, like hiring people, and they probably think of firing people. I think those are probably the three most. I think when
That's
I
right.
tell people I'm in HR, they're like, "Well, do you fire and hire people, or do you, like?" I think those are common questions I get asked. So I think payroll is obviously one of those things I think a lot of people are familiar with. You went from the interesting thing is, like, you were at Citigroup for almost 4 years, so obviously you got a lot of great experience there.
That's right.
And that was your intro to HR. But then what I thought was really interesting about your background is then you took I think a very different career, I think, move, and went from a public company to the state of Connecticut, right? So to a
That's
government
right.
job. So so tell me a little bit about, like, how you ended up going to the public sector, right, and going to a government role, and a little bit about, because I've never worked for like the state or a town or the federal government. How different is working for, say, the state of Connecticut versus a private company?
Sure. So, in terms of how I, got there, after about 4 years working for Citigroup, I was ready for, more challenges. I was ready to grow. And at the time, the organization just really didn't have a next level role that was right for me. So I was, certainly looking to expand my horizons. I did have a former colleague who I worked with at Citigroup, who ended up going over to the state and, shared with me the process, which at the time, I think it might have changed actually, where, most of the jobs that you would have to, take with the state required you to test in. They would have an exam for, many of the state positions. So, I kept an eye out for, a payroll based role, and ended up taking the exam. And once you take the exam, then you're eligible to apply for any job postings for that particular position. So I applied for a few different ones: payroll examiner, payroll officer, and I ended up took the exam as a payroll clerk. And the role which that I applied for and ultimately earned was for the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services as a payroll clerk. And that was definitely a different experience. I think with the government sector, one of the biggest, I think, differences is tied to, the goal, right? What is the goal of an organization, right? The majority of publicly traded organizations is to maximize shareholder value, right? Create profit, make money. Where with the government sector, it's a little bit more altruistic. Right. There may be some efficiencies and money that might be made, but that's not really the ultimate goal. They're there as a service. It's a little bit more altruistic. In service to the people of that municipality, the state, the country, right? So there are some similarities, but I think that difference, definitely, there's in some respects there's a pride there that you're part of an organization that's helping people, and particularly for Demas, that really was pivotal for me in particular because I gained a whole new appreciation for mental health and the stigma around it, and the people that work every day to help the individuals that go through things, and working with the employees who supported those people, which is the state of Connecticut, like all of us, right? Our families, our friends, carried into how I manage and my style of being an HR partner and supporting employees with that mental health, understanding. And I actually, ended up later on getting a mental health first aid certification with Cigna. Given that passion, but a lot of that. So that was one, and then also there's some of the traditional. There's a lot more labor, union. A lot more longevity. You don't have to where most traded non-government organizations, turnover, things like that are really critical. It's really the opposite. People stay for a long time because of the benefits and all that good stuff, and they don't have to really worry as much about turnover. But then that's a whole other thing. And then there's also some of the bureaucracy, which there's the myth, which I think there are some truths to that. There's a lot of red tape and processes that I think organization that's driven by profit would be more motivated to cut those efficiencies out, where a lot of that stayed in from like 20, 30 years ago. We did this because this guy put this in place 15, 20, 30 years ago, and that's why we do it, right? That innovation piece is not as much of a motivation, I would say. And but I know, but with that said, I want to just clarify that I know that that's been kind of an ongoing discussion, and that's been changing over the years.
Yeah, no, I think that's some great analysis of the difference between the private and the public sector. So I appreciate that, and it was, and I love how you gained this appreciation for mental health based off of supporting that organization. So I think that's great. This was I think another pivotal point in your career, because you made the change from a payroll specialist to what they called a human resources assistant, which I'm going to make the guess here that was like a big change in the work that you were doing, and probably like really kind of propelled your career in HR, if I had to guess.
Absolutely. And, some organizations, like you said, traditionally payroll is tied to human resources. Some, like my last organization, Webster Bank, payroll is rolled up into finance, but it was completely different. Being an HR assistant really, got me into almost entry-level human resources, and I worked a lot with the HRIS systems and got a lot of exposure to, different, parts of the organization. Different labor relations cases, and we also did a lot of the training, and that really gave me a lot more exposure to human resources, and further just deepened my resolve that this is a career path that I want to pursue. And just going back to some of the differences between the state and the non-government sector, there was almost, I don't want to say controversy, but typically when it comes to progression, it's usually set in stone based on your seniority, based on your position. If you're this level in the union, you're going to be, if you're like level 1, you're going to be level 2. If you're level 2, you're going to be level 3. So somebody coming in from the outside, getting to that level is usually unheard of. And, long story short, me, getting that opportunity was in part due to, the connections that I made, the quality of work that I did as a payroll clerk, being the type of person that, did all the jobs that no one else wanted to do, and just really making a name for myself. So when that role came out, I was actually contacted by one of the recruiting HR person, and they said, hey, we had this role out. Usually, a person like this would be in line, but I think you'd be a great fit. And, I ended up interviewing for the role. Actually, when I was briefly on leave, when my second child was born, and I met with the head of HR, who, also kind of said that, typically we don't go this route, but, we really see a potential in you. And, so talk to me about your processes and how you think you'd be able to come in and, make a difference. So, in some ways I blazed a little bit of a trail of, taking a non-conventional route, because otherwise I probably would have just been in payroll. I could have stayed in that role for 20, 30 years and just retired, but I was, continuing to climb, and I was a little bit more ambitious than that.
Yeah, it's interesting, Kyle. You've now said on 3 different times that you got your next role through the connections that you had and had made. So I just want to point that out for anyone listening, because you nailed it, right? Like, a lot of people underestimate the power of networking, and when you're trying to find your next opportunity, it's not just about going on a website and applying for a job. Usually it's through the connections that you have made, and you just gave 3 examples of that. So I appreciate you sharing that, because I can't stress that enough to people, Kyle. I literally can't stress that enough. So you became this human resources assistant with the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. Then you moved to the Department of Education in another totally different role, right? So it looks like you did some recruiting there and more like learning and development type opportunities. So again, just continuing to broaden your HR knowledge. But then the cool thing is, and again, like you're such a fascinating career journey. You left the state, which to your point is like almost unheard of, because people are probably like, "Oh my gosh, why would you leave a state job?"
Yeah.
And you went to Webster Bank, and you were there for 5.5 years in a variety of roles. So what was the reason that you left the state of Connecticut and to go to Webster Bank? And I'm going to guess it had something to do with someone you knew.
There was an element of that. So I was working as an HR associate. I was doing kind of a generalist type of role, recruiting, some labor, employee relations. And it was during that time I decided that I wanted to continue to distinguish myself. And I did that by getting my master's. So I ended up starting my journey of earning my master's degree at the UConn School of Business. And as I was learning about human resources, especially in the contemporary sense, well, HR as a current business partner, a lot of our assignments were tied to, okay, well, go back to your organization and kind of look at, okay, well, what are the processes that you're doing? How did it tie to the work? And I'm kind of looking and saying, what, I, feel that, I want to, again, expand my horizons and, work for an organization where I can gain some more experiences and really kind of work in that business partner sense where, culturally, HR has that proverbial seat at the table. I had an amazing job. I worked with amazing people. The benefits were also great, right? I had 2 kids at the time. So, when I decided to leave, people did think that I was crazy. But I felt that it was the best I bet on myself and just, took that. Took a chance, but I have to say this though. One of the cool things about the HR program is that we got exposure to a lot of different HR leaders. They would have guest speakers come in and talk about their journeys and whatnot. And one of the guest speakers was the CHRO of Webster Bank. He came in and talked about how he came from GE and implemented all these processes, and it was really amazing and honestly just very interesting discussion that he had with all of us. And he left at the end of it an open invitation and said, "Hey, we have some openings. Feel free to apply." So I took it upon myself to reach out to him, and I just introduced myself and said, "Hey, I'm interested. I love what you were talking about. I'm passionate about HR. I'm trying to learn what I can, and I'm just on this journey of just trying to understand and just build myself. Let's connect." And he ended up connecting me with the recruiter, who shared the positions that were available at the time. It was a recruiting position that I wasn't quite interested in, and then not long after that, an HR business partner role opened up. I applied for that position. I ended up going through about 5 or 6 rounds of interviews with both HR partners, my colleagues, as well as the business partners that I would be working with, and ended up earning that position. And, that was definitely a very difficult decision. I kind of did a Franklin T. I had kind of the pros, leaving the state, staying with the state, right? And ultimately, like I said, I bet on myself. And even though I did give up those, at the time anyway, amazing benefits for myself and my family, I just felt that in the longer term, this would set me up to just gain experiences that would put me at another level. I didn't want that benefits and things like that to limit my potential. So I ended up making that very difficult decision to move on, and that in itself was a journey, because my last corporate experience was at more of an entry level. This was a little bit more senior, right? So I'm coming into this culture where I'm kind of back in this environment that it's a different type of culture. It's banking, which I have even though I worked for Citigroup, it's a different. It's a city. Yeah. I was working for a smaller regional bank, and what I struggled with the most in my development that I ended up overcoming is navigating the gray. With the state, it was a little bit more cut and dry. You had these books, they had contracts and, and versus this or that were very specific, types of would help to guide you in how you would manage, a process or a situation or an employee situation where, you had your policy, which was overarching at Webster at the enterprise level, but then you had to leverage your judgment and your values and help to navigate some very difficult employee situations. And as a business partner, what's unique about Webster is that we also had oversight over employee relations. So we did the strategy stuff, the succession planning, talent management, performance, solving that talent puzzle. How do you create an environment where people feel fulfilled and people want to work and don't want to leave, but also managing the end-to-end process of employee relations. So my background certainly helped, but it was definitely a challenge to develop and grow and gain those skills.
Can you just share with my audience what employee relations is for those that don't know?
Yeah, sure. So I always like to emphasize the relationship. So employee relations essentially is the relationship between the employee and manager in terms of most commonly tied to the policies and procedures, the disciplinary process, ensuring that things are don't just align with the values of the organization, but also ensures that you're following you're following the law. So a lot of it had, most often you think about employee relations, it's basically the disciplinary process and just making sure that things are followed to the letter and that you're, helping to ensure that the risk of, any broader issues are minimized, so that by ensuring that the managers are following all the rules of the processes to the letter.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I also appreciate you, kind of sharing a little bit about what you do as a human resources generalist or a human resources business partner. They're called different things at different companies.
Yeah.
I like to I refer to them as like the quarterbacks of HR. Like usually everyone goes to the human resource business partner or generalist for pretty much everything, and they're the ones that figure out if they need to bring someone else in to help. So
that's right.
It sounds like you had, an amazing, almost 6 years at Webster Bank in a variety of roles, supporting different organizations, and really to your point, right? Like just continue your journey of learning HR from, way back, starting as a payroll specialist to now being an HR business partner. So kudos to you on the journey. I know that I want to ask a little bit about your philanthropic work before we jump off. I know you just took a new job at CVS Health, so I just want to congratulate you on that and wish you the best. And I know you literally just started. So, but any advice for my listeners when you're just starting a job? Anything you do like really purposefully to make sure you're successful when you start a new job?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. I would say one, you definitely want to make sure that you don't be a wallflower. You want to make sure that you're getting out there and you're introducing yourself and you have an understanding of who everyone is and how they support the organization and how they support you, and also equally important, how you can support them. Again, those relationships are really important, particularly as a newer employee. Not waiting for those intros to be made, but getting out there and not being afraid to make those yourself, which can be difficult, particularly in a virtual environment. I would also say that, when you're thinking about being purposeful, you outline you have a document, you have a conversation with your manager to align expectations. You probably asked this during the interview, what does success look like? How's my role measured?
Question.
But
Yes.
When you actually get the job and you sign the letter and you're there, I think it's important to revisit that question, and really, break it down in terms of time frame. My first 30 days, what would you say? How would you measure success? 45 days, 90 days, etc. And, staying connected so that you're on the same page with your leader, the person that, signs off on your reviews, and is going to be ultimately your advocate for success, that you're aligned on with what they expect from you.
I think that's such great advice. I love that question. Like, what does success look like? And to your point, aligning expectations, especially as a new employee with your new manager, is critical. So I thank you for sharing that. So before we close, I want to ask about some volunteer and philanthropic work you do, because you do quite a bit. And I want to get the sense that, why do you do the philanthropic work that you do, and maybe share, one of the things that you're doing right now that you're really passionate about, and why it kind of lights you up.
Sure. So a couple of things. One, I would say it's in my DNA. It's how I grew up. I as a young kid was helping my parents in the soup kitchens in our church, taking care of other people. In my high school, being at a Jesuit school, there's this saying for Jesuits, AMDG. It's a Latin acronym, ad majorem Dei gloriam, which means being a man for the greater glory and being a man for others. And we learned about that and those values. And even if you don't subscribe to religion, being someone who is a man for others and a person for others is, I think, a great philosophy to be a part of. So in addition to I've been a big brother. I've done charities throughout my life, but two particular ones that I want to highlight, or maybe three for within HR, is one that I helped to found, which is the National Association of African Americans in HR. It's a national organization, but we founded the state chapter here in Connecticut last year. And I'm also the co-director of DE&I for HRACC, which is a central state SHRM chapter, and a couple other things as well. But part of the reason that really drove me more so than ever in the last year were the events that took place last year with social justice and the murders of George Floyd and other individuals. Those events affected me deeply, and I've done a lot of reflection on how I think it's important that everyone looks at that and understands, takes time to reflect on what difference can they make in the world to ensure that those types of things don't happen again. And for me, it was really thinking about the spaces in which I exist, which is in human resources, and being someone like my voice, especially as a male, Black male, a father, of color, having a voice and ensuring that I'm making a difference and making a meaningful difference. And there's the altruistic piece, but then there's also a benefit with just gaining new skills. I'm the director of finance, right? And I have a financial background, but just being able to manage that, marketing, helping to navigate an organization in a microcosm, gives you some really interesting skills that you wouldn't have otherwise, but then also building your network. And I would say indirectly, the role that I have now with my new organization came about through, indirectly because of the work that I've done. I have I have a brand on social media. I share what I do with others. And an old coworker from Webster reached out to me to check in, see how I was doing, and mentioned they had, some roles. And one of her old coworkers was someone who I had on as a panelist on an event that I moderated. So there was these and then at that same organization, I had someone who I graduated with in my master's program. So there was this just indirectly, not purposely looking for it, but it just fell into place that this was an organization that I can see myself growing with and was going to be a part of my journey. So there is that benefit there. And I would also just say, in terms of just being a giver, you bring abundance into your life by being someone who gives, who has an open hand, right? So I certainly want to impart that on the viewers as well as like you definitely can improve your career and get things that you're looking for by being someone who is not purposely like just being someone who's generous with your time and your energy.
Well, I love how you're and I call it skills-based volunteering. You're using your HR skills as part of the philanthropic work that you're doing, right? So, and it's something that you're really good at, right? Because the HR space, how you can make an impact, and you're able to do that. So I absolutely love that. So I appreciate you sharing that, and I appreciate all the work that you're doing. Not only here in Connecticut, but you're having an impact across the country too. So kudos to you, Kyle, and just thank you for the work that you're doing. So this is a fantastic discussion. I always close with the same question with every guest, Kyle, which is, what is the one piece of advice that you'd give my listeners that's helped you reach your full potential? So that one thing that's helped you be successful, whether it be in the public or the private sector, that one thing that you would share.
Sure. So, I would say, as I mentioned, being a giver and someone who's genuine, right, in your intentions, not just to get something, but just being a giver. There's a great book by Adam Grant called Give and Take that talks about that. People who are givers tend to get more out of life. And I would also add, just talk about EQ, emotional intelligence. And really the definition of that is just aligning your perception of yourself with how others view you. And as innovation increases, technology advances, what's always going to remain and continue to be a key differentiator are individuals who are really strong in their EQ skills, and they're able to navigate and manage themselves, know their triggers, have a hold of that, and also be able to build relationships and connect on a really human level. That will never go out of style, no matter how many advances that we have in the world. So I really, even more than ever, especially with technology and being virtual more often, that EQ skill is a must have.
Well said. So Kyle Wiley, thank you so much for joining me on the Full Potential Podcast. Just absolutely fantastic discussion. I love your journey. I love the advice. We're going to link to your LinkedIn profile in the show description, both on YouTube and in the podcast. So people can, if they want to get in touch with you, Kyle, they can find you on LinkedIn. You share a lot of content, and I know you're always looking to connect with people. So thanks for making time, taking time away from your family and your new job to join us on the show.
Thanks very much, Nick. It was a pleasure, and thanks. And I, had a great conversation.
Thank you, sir. Be well.
Yeah, you as well.